For so long, there's been one long-running series on my watch list that has just been sitting on the bench collecting dust. Specifically, it was the last long-running series on that list because I went through the majority of the other giants during the COVID lockdown and when I was younger. So finally, I was able to get around to watching this one. So 367 episodes, OVAs, and a few movies. GINTAMA is now in the books. So before watching it, I had heard a lot about it and seen a few clips, a handful here and there, completely out of context. And I knew I was going to watch it eventually, but it would just keep getting pushed back. Time was one of the main reasons, no doubt, but another thing is that, and I know for a fact I'm not the only one who's experienced this, but I just cannot binge like I used to. So even if I did find the time to put a sizable dent into the anime, I just wouldn't, because gone are the days where I could sit down and watch at the bare minimum 15 episodes of anime a day. However, I was able to bring back the days of my youth. I'm still 20, by the way, in case anyone thinks otherwise. Anyway, I found myself with enough time to binge it, which I'll always prefer binging over the standard way of watching, I guess. And more importantly, I found myself with the want to watch it. So the setting is Edo, Japan, but it's an Edo, Japan that has been invaded by aliens. The series refers to them as Amanto collectively, and samurai have been outlawed. So this is a world of the past and the future. Our main character is Sakata Gintoki, who is himself a samurai, but now barely makes a living as a freelancer by completing odd jobs for anyone, and he is joined by Shinpachi, who along with his sister is trying to keep their family dojo afloat in this new age, as well as Kagura, who completes the main trio for this series, but she is far from what you'd expect from the sort of female lead. She is just as stupid and just as outgoing as the other two, and Sadaharu, who is a really big, really great dog. So the two of them end up working side by side with Gintoki in his odd jobs business, and to begin with, it's almost entirely an episodic series with the odd 2 to 3 episode stories here and there, which I wasn't expecting, but it actually works really well since it so effortlessly fleshes out the world more each episode. Like one episode will be here helping this person, next episode will be here doing this, or they're doing that, here running away from them, and there's a ton of crossover between the characters. So as much as the plot of the individual episodes are separate from one another, what they each bring to the table, introduce and establish, that stuff is carried forward for the rest of the series. I mean, the comedy is the first and main thing people bring up in discussion when talking about GINTAMA, and I will get to that, but also even the humor is involved in really bringing the story to life. Like there may be something you've completely forgotten about, and it will suddenly be brought up in the most random of moments. There's also the extended character gags. I'm still leaving the main talk about the comedy until later, but I want to say one thing, which is the humor works so well because, and this will sound kind of corny or cliche, but it is more than just cheap laughs for the sake of levity. It really is just the heart and soul of the story. And speaking of those extended character gags, there is that side cast, which is my absolute favorite from at least the last few years or so. And one thing the story has going for it outside of the story is the fact that it is long running, and I have this kind of affinity for long running stories because you just get to spend so much more time with these characters, and if handled correctly, none of them will fade into the background over time. So I think the GINTAMA character cast is amazing. The most prominent of which is the Shinsengumi, who are basically the police named after the real life group who were tasked with protecting the shogun not that long ago. Only the 1800s, you would think there would have been much more time between the present and them. So there's another trio or main trio from that force consisting of Kondo, the commander, who is unhealthily obsessed with Shinpachi's sister, Hijikata, who is unhealthily obsessed with mayonnaise, and Okita, who is a sadist. So that's fun. There is also Shinpachi's sister herself, Tai, whose temperament is not to be tested, Zura, who leads the anti-foreigner faction, Hasegawa, he is homeless, and so on. And these guys are, I'd say, more than just side characters. It would be more than appropriate to call them members of the main cast, really. That might be a consequence of me binging the series, so I would see them all the time, every day. But regardless, they're all great. Their individual characters are really well defined. They all have one trait or another that takes the stupidity or ridiculousness up another notch, and the character relationships are clear. It's like I said before, how the comedy really really helps to flesh things out. Whenever you meet a new character and find out what they're all about, you are not going to forget it while watching or reading. Over 700 chapters, by the way, that's insane. And I recognized some of their voice actors, like Hijikata shares the same voice actor as Zoro, which is really funny because he's a policeman, and there's the running joke that Zoro himself would be a policeman in real life because of who he always ends up fighting. There's Hidoro, who shares the same voice actor as Kurama and Kaido, which is funny because Kaido is the world's strongest creature, and Hidoro himself, even though he's a pacifist, he's one of the strongest characters in the entire story. And lastly, Hasegawa shares a voice actor with Akainu, but the reason that's funny isn't because of like similar character traits, but it's because I now associate that voice with Hasegawa first and foremost instead of Akainu, which is to say Akainu needs to get his shit together and do something, because in my mind he just got leapfrogged by a homeless man. Now the comedy. The simple thing for me is to say that there's so many jokes in near enough every episode that there's pretty much every kind of humor included. It's got that universal humor that anyone can understand. It has the more local humor that's targeted towards its Japanese audience. It has a lot of that actually. One thing I can say for a fact is that watching Gintama improved my reading skills massively, because the amount of time I had to read an extra set of subtitles that were on the top of the screen to explain a lot of those jokes was far too many to count. There's also the referential parody humor that's definitely present in those clips that people see out of context. There's the meta humor, the self-deprecating humor, constantly breaking the fourth wall essentially, some slapstick, even the classic silent film comedy can be found here as well. It's genuinely an absolute goldmine. Although of course that doesn't mean it's for everyone because of how heavily it does lean in that direction, especially early on. But it really is something to behold. A joke started absolutely ages ago can suddenly shift into something much more, and all of a sudden it's an integral part to the story. So with the earlier half of the story being more episodic and people maybe preferring a more continuous structured story, don't worry, because all of that stuff is definitely gonna come back around. But on that topic of preference in storytelling, for me it's pretty much if it's good then I will probably like it, regardless of the genre or age rating, you know. Except for horror movies, I cannot handle horror movies. I tried to push the boat out again by watching Alien Romulus in IMAX after going through all the older movies at home. The thing was, I watched those older movies in broad daylight with my blinds fully open, and I didn't think they were that scary. I know for some people the Alien movies might not be scary at all, and I do often hear about how modern horror movies have lost their spark, but I don't care because I went to the cinema and remembered how much I hate jump scares, and that thing at the end scarred me for life. Anyway, I've gone completely off the trail. The genre and stuff isn't that important to me as long as it's a good story. Like, if it's mostly a comedy like Gintama, I'll laugh along with it. If it's a bleaker tone, I'll watch it with a much more stern, serious expression. I understand liking things one way more than another way, but I'm happy to enjoy most kinds of stories in all kinds of mediums of storytelling. I can enjoy Gintama when it's upbeat and comedic, but I'll also enjoy it when things darken up and take a turn. So speaking of which, this series can also get pretty serious and has some pretty deep depth to it as well. It's the second half of the story where the stakes and tension begin to rise and maybe even overtake the humor in the series, but even nearer to the beginning there was some heavy material which came along with the introductions of each of the supporting characters, and it doesn't feel jarring either for it to go from this week to week more or less self-contained format to an expanding and real plot. Gintoki isn't just a samurai who lost his job because of some aliens who just decided to take over the planet. His own backstory is actually a thread that runs through the entire story, which sounds stupid now that I'm saying it out loud because he is the main character. Of course it would work like that, but it's something that slowly comes to light with time as all the other parts of his past come back and reveal themselves to us. And it's not just him. For example, there's the character of the Shogun who only made very sporadic appearances here and there, and it was really fun whenever he did. Well, he found himself thrust into the spotlight in what might be my favorite arc in the entire story. So a really good balance is struck there where neither tones take away from the other. Also, one thing, that shift and seriousness found later on, that kind of change from episodic to longer arcs, does not mean the earlier episodes can be skipped. If anyone thinks it's okay to skip canon material of any story, they are completely incorrect. Whether it's trying to make you laugh or make you think, from my point of view there's always this feeling of sincerity, because when it was time to turn things up or down a couple notches, when the story wanted to elicit a specific reaction out of you, it wasn't disingenuous. A genuine heartfelt scene wouldn't be undercut with an out of place one-liner or something. Even if there was humor inserted into those kinds of scenes, it would be appropriate where the joke would play into those characters' personalities so it would fit into the moment. Going into it, I knew I was gonna laugh because the humor is what everyone talks about, or at least that's how it was from my perspective before I watched it. What I wasn't expecting was how much I was going to laugh and how often I would. I also was expecting to become really endeared to the main characters. Little did I know that sentiment would extend to the rest of the cast as well, including the stupid prince. It's really so good, and I recently watched a video that covered the top 10 highest rated series on my anime list for the past 20 years, I think, and that video also played a role in making me finally watch the show as well, to be honest. And Gintama made a lot of appearances in that video because it has so many seasons, with each season having different names, like Gintama apostrophe, how would you pronounce this one? Gintama degrees. And I know anime ratings don't mean much, especially with review bombing and everything, but it makes total sense to me why Gintama has always been near the very top.